It's been awesome. Now, I want to talk to you about the gamification revolution. And, you know, I'm struck by this idea that we're here, all of us together here today, as we have been in years past, to change the world, to talk about engagement, to figure out, you know, how we engage with each other, engage with our audiences of employees, of customers, and so on. But I want to take you back to the story of how I got into this whole thing in the first place. And I was born in 1974. And my parents were immigrants to Canada from Hungary and Romania. And in 1982, my very insightful dad thought, remember, he's an immigrant from Eastern Europe, but he saw the first kind of home computers come out, and he thought, I think this will be a big thing. And I don't know why, but I think my nerdy 8-year-old son will really gravitate towards one of these things. And so my parents bought me a Commodore VIC-20, which some of you might remember. And it was only a few weeks after that that I learned my first lesson of computing, when literally 3 or 4 weeks after the VIC-20 came out, the Commodore 64 came out and made my computer obsolete. True story. But like most kids who got a new computer, especially in the 80s and still true today, the first thing that I did with that computer was try to find a way to play games with it. And some of you might remember that you actually could install software using cassette tapes on a Commodore VIC-20. It was kind of amazing, and you sourced them from all over crazy places. It was a particularly good game. But I went out and tried to find games that I could play, because that was one of the things that this new technology, this new platform was enabling me to do. And it wasn't long until I actually started to want to write the games that I was playing. And I started with the kind of type-in game books, which some of you might be familiar with these, where you had to, like, the core language for the game was common, and then based on which computer you had, you actually changed certain lines of code. And then that became kind of the opening salvo for me actually, like, writing software, because it was, you know, like, how does this actually work, and what does this all mean? And so soon, you know, you're in the mix, like, making these things and changing the experience. And over time, my relationship to games deepened and grew. And I played a lot of this game, Civilization, which many of you are familiar with, and I talk about at great length, which taught me all of these important lessons about games, how they work, but also about addiction and having problems. When I'd find myself basically, like, sitting over at my friend's house in undergrad, ignoring parties that were going on around me so I could get just one more turn. Or waking up in the middle of the night thinking about the one more turn that I've got to get, or how I'm going to defeat the Aztecs finally in our battle. So a few years later, I put my interest in games to the test. I figured I was working in the networking industry. After I finished grad school, I went to work at Cisco, Checkpoint Software, a couple of other networking companies. And I realized pretty quickly in that context that these were not my people. And I don't want to single out pleated khaki pants and tucked-in polo shirts, but more or less, that was the brigade of people that I worked with. And no disrespect to you if that's your outfit of choice, but those were not my people. And so having this sort of first big realization, I took a massive pay cut and went to work on the Game Developers Conference, Gamasutra, and Game Developer Magazine, and got thrown right into the center of this amazing games industry in the late 90s. And after spending a little bit of time there, I left to help start this company called Trimedia. And I know it sounds weird, but in the late 90s, when we started Trimedia, it was not possible to legitimately download a game on the internet. You couldn't do it legally. It was not an option. And we were one of the first companies to actually say, let's do that. And we put our arms around an entire ecosystem to facilitate the download of games, from publisher all the way to consumers. And we sold that company in 2005. And so, and when we sold it, by the way, we powered about 4/5 of the world's game downloads. And so, if you happen to download a game between 1999 and 2005, thank you very much for your patronage. It was a really, really interesting and fun time. But after we sold Trimedia, I had a crisis of conscience. I woke up one day. It was literally like that. And I was like, is this all games can do? Is this all? Now, don't get me wrong. Entertainment's important and meaningful. I believe entertainment is a purpose unto itself. It does not need another layer of meaning to be meaningful and important, but I nonetheless thought that maybe we could do something else with it. Maybe there was another there. And so I started to look at what it was that other people had done to explore the intersection of games and deeper kinds of meaning, including serious games and so on, and start to build applications, concepts, ideas that would help facilitate that particular idea. And so in 2006, I gave my first talk on the subject of gamification. And it was a colossal bomb. It was like the worst talk I've ever given times 100. I got up in front of an audience at the Casual Game Conference in Kiev, I think it was, or in Amsterdam. I got up in front of this audience in Amsterdam, and I was like, guys, guess what? If we just put games together with other things, we can do all this awesome stuff. And everybody in the room was like, and just like, and out of the 160 people in the audience, like 3 people came up to me and wanted to talk to me about the subject. And it was sort of a revelation for me that these were not my people. They did not see what I saw. But I thought, okay, there's got to be something here. I know I feel it. And so I started to build these apps and do these things and raise some money, try to experience it, and kept talking about it. 2008, did this talk with Rajat and a couple of other people. And it was like, oh my God, there's some of us out here doing something around this topic. And a publishing agent came and saw me talk and said that would make a great book. And so I wrote my first book, Game-Based Marketing. And a couple of years later, the Gamification Revolution, Gamification by Design, and now the new book, Gamification Revolution, which all of you have seen. And in the process, all this crazy stuff happened. We did GSummit on a lark at the end of 2010, launched the conference in 2011 with Jane McGonigal here when she released her new book, Reality's Broken. And this industry kind of took off. We started gamification.co to be a resource for everyone. We launched Dopamine a year and a half ago to help companies, big and small, apply gamification. And we continued with this event this year, GSummit, and all the other cool things that we have planned, including more GSummits, both on the East Coast and around the world starting this fall. But I want to go back to the games that I played when I was a kid for a second. Those games that I played let me do some really interesting things. They changed me in really interesting ways. They let me be somebody that I actually wasn't, because I was kind of a chubby, comical kid. What I wasn't was an athlete, but they let me feel like I was. They let me experience what that might be like. I wasn't an international super agent who could travel around the world and solve crime, but Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego let me feel for a moment that I was. And I was also kind of a geography nerd, so that didn't hurt. And to a young sort of tween-age boy, it certainly gave me a moment to experience what it might be like to be an adult in prurient ways, Leisure Suit Larry being the example. And I remember clandestinely in the library of my school, of my middle school, some boy had the floppy disk of Leisure Suit Larry, and when none of the teachers were looking, we'd run over to the Apple II and put it in and be like, "Wah, boobies!" And so it was, it was crazy. It was crazy. It was hilarious, and it really changed my world. And now we also know that science tells us that it was changing my brain too. It wasn't just my perception of myself. It was literally rewiring my brain through all the methods that we've talked about today, but particularly through this intrinsic reinforcement loop powered by dopamine. And also, it was probably some of the games that I was playing and continue to play were giving rise to increased fluid intelligence. I'm not going to give the games all the credit for that. My parents deserve some of the credit, and my work deserves some of the credit. But we now know that some game modalities can change your intelligence, like N-back or dual N-back, which have been proven to raise fluid intelligence. We know that they were doing that, and we know that they were rewiring my brain. They must have been, just like they were for everybody else. But now, it's 2013, and the games that we play today, the games that we've encountered, look a fair bit different from the ones that we had when I was a kid, right? They're way more advanced. They're just crazy looking. They're crazy powerful. They're so incredibly different, so incredibly more advanced. And what they've done to society is also dramatically different. My father never could have predicted that this is what would have come out of that little thing that happened in the mid-1970s. Because coincidentally, I'm born around the time of the launch of the contemporary video game industry. But nobody could have predicted that in the future, people would sit together without paying attention to each other for long periods of time, engage with their devices, a direct outgrowth of that game and the rewiring of our brains. And yet, despite all these advances that have happened, the way society is so different, the way that games have changed, it's almost 40 years, guys, I'm almost 40. It's 40 years since the launch of the contemporary video game business, and we are still having the same fucking discussion we were having 40 years ago. Are games good or are they bad? Are they tools of greatness or are they tools of evil? Will they destroy people's brains or will they elevate them? Same discussion. Same discussion. And there's that group of people who exist in the world today who are, to my mind, beautiful optimists living in a namby-pamby reality, in which they believe that games will fundamentally solve all of our problems. That games will fix the world and they are amazing, and if we just make the best game, the world will suddenly be a better place. Neglecting to realize what you all in this room know intimately, which is it's not games that change the world, it's people that change the world. And the game designs change the people. And there's also the group, usually we tend to think of them as elderly, but it's not necessary to think of them that way. There's also the group that demonizes this meme, that demonizes this trend, who are convinced, despite all of the evidence to the contrary, that games are evil, that they're bad, that they waste people's time. Same discussion 40 years later. And I've got to tell you, I am so bored of this discussion. So I don't want to have it anymore. I'm personally deciding that we're ending this discussion. I am not going to continue to advance an argument about whether or not games are good or bad. Anything can be good or bad, right? Anything can be good or bad. A powerful tool in the hands of somebody great can be great. And as Jeremy pointed out, you can also be evil with that same awesome thing. This is not the discussion that we need to be having. In the meantime, while people are out arguing over here about the effect and the power of games as a medium to change people, they're missing what I believe is the forest from the trees. And that is to say, we are on the cusp of a significant and unprecedented step in the evolution of humanity. And it's really something unlike anything that we thought would happen. And I don't know that this is it, but you've probably heard me make this assertion before. I don't believe that people necessarily with autism and ADHD are a reflection of an illness or some other kind of problem in humanity. I believe increasingly they are a representation of the next generation of people. They are the next evolutionary human. Their extraordinary increase in the population of these people in the world. Look at this chart. And by the way, only 25% of this increase is related to increased diagnostic sophistication. 75% of this increase is factual. Factual increase in the incidence of autism. And as you probably saw, the crazy stats from the other day, 11% of the American population is on ADHD medicine, has an ADHD diagnosis. At some point, if you project this curve out into the future, it doesn't take very long before this is a large plurality of the population. And at that point, we can no longer say it's some group of people who have a problem or an issue or an illness. At some point, they're another type of human walking among us with different skills, different views of the world, different kinds of intelligence, and different ways of interacting. Now, one of the hallmarks, especially of people with high-functioning autism, Asperger's, and so on, is this higher level of fluid intelligence, which is the kind of intelligence that we use when we problem solve. It's not the same thing as the kind of intelligence we use when we solve a standard kind of math test or memory test. It's really our ability to figure out things when we don't have the information we need, something new and novel. And that's a very interesting connection, that high-functioning autism is connected to increased fluid intelligence, gives us a very unique pointer on how this thing is going to go down. And so I started to do some research and try to understand what could be causing all of this. What is this about? And I happened upon the work of Nobel Prize-winning researcher Robert Fogel. And Professor Fogel talks about a concept called Techno Physio evolution. And you see, what he researches is not autism, it's not ADHD, it's a different sphere. He's been looking at how technology has increased the lifespan and vitality of humans. How technology has increased the lifespan and vitality of humans. And his research is shocking. In 1850, the average American male was 5'7" and lived to be 45. In 1980, the average American was 5'10" and lived to be 75. Now, in that period of time, they crunched an unbelievable amount of data. He won the Nobel fucking Prize for data crunching. They crunched a ton of data, and let me tell you, your skeptical mind, let me tell you, they controlled for every single variable. The variable that determined that difference was the technology available in society. Technology made us live longer and get taller. Technology. Now, if technology could change how long we live and how vital we are, why would we assume that it wouldn't also similarly change other aspects of our lives? And so, you know, I feel like, total Revenge of the Nerds moment, I feel like it's like Revenge of the Nerds, a little bit like Come to Life. Think of it. If you want to believe in this concept in one way or another, it's no longer an evolutionary problem. You no longer won't be able to reproduce if you're kind of nerdy. If you have poor social skills, maybe 100 years ago or 200 years ago, you might have had a trouble finding a mate and having offspring. But today, there's no negative genetic pressure, either phenotypal pressure or genotypal pressure, to not reproduce, more or less, if you're kind of a nerd. And also, we have changed the relationship between very young humans and technology in a really profound and meaningful way. These, like, babies, basically, give them an iPad, and they just sit there and play with it forever, ad infinitum. And this changes from a very early age the way that we view the world and the way that we interact with it. Now, I'm sure most of us had hoped that the next evolution of humans would look like something out of a science fiction novel, right? It certainly would be like, oh, I wish we could fly, or like, I'm waiting for the guy who can turn everything into ice. I don't think it's going down like that, friends. I think it's going down really differently. I think it's going down with this new generation of different social skilled, different fluid intelligence, different way of perceiving the world, highly technologically dependent generation of humans who are an adaptation to these technologies, particularly the games that have existed in the world. And what the interesting thing is about this next generation of human is that they're actually doing pretty well already. And many of them, the early ones, especially the higher functioning ones, appear to be running rings around the traditional order, upending the way that things work, acting differently from the way that we might expect them to act, and nonetheless being very successful in our midst. You know, but the previous generation has got a lot of ennui, let's say, about this transition. Google millennial management, just for giggles. This is one of the first things that comes up when you Google it, right? There's all this tension between the previous generation and this next generation, all this argument. But you see, this tension, frustration, ennui, this is misplaced energy, friends. Because I'll tell you what, if you don't learn how to harness this incredibly fluid, intelligent, technologically literate next generation of people, next evolution of humanity, they're just going to leave their jobs working for you and start their own company to compete with you. They don't need your job. And they don't need your product either. I'm struck by this one conversation that I had, that's happened a few times, some time ago, with one of the world's largest auto manufacturers. They came to me and they were like, Gabe, we have a problem. And I'm like, cool, I like problems. And I was like, what's the problem? And they said, we have encountered an unusual situation. The American teenager no longer wants to drive. And I was like, what? They were like, yeah. For the first time in the history of the introduction of the automobile in the United States, today's teenagers want to drive less than their parents. And the reasons are very interesting. There's the financial reason. They don't have as much money. There's the environmental reason. They care a great deal about the environment and don't want to ruin it. But the real reason, their research showed, the main reason why teenagers in America today compete to not be behind the wheel when they go out with a group of friends is because they cannot Instagram or text while they do so. I'm not kidding you. If you had told me that Instagram would have killed the car like 5 years ago, I would have been like, what are you talking about? But it's an important point, and one that Jesse Schell put a very, very fine double underline under, which is people follow their bliss. People pursue pleasure, right? They're fundamentally hedonistic. and even very entrenched behaviors, things that are so ingrained in the American psyche that we never thought that they would have changed, those behaviors nonetheless can be unseated by new forms of pleasure, new forms of engagement. They will choose that which is most engaging to them. And so we arrive, some of us, at this topic of gamification. In order to be able to understand this, in order to be able to level this playing field, many of you are here to try to figure this out because you see this conflict, you see this challenge today already. And at the heart of gamification is this notion that systems that create engagement are filled with feedback, friends, and fun. That these three things are what make systems engaging, what make people attracted to them, what bring them into that corner. And just this week, we've had a real lesson about the power or failure to grok the importance of feedback, friends, and fun. When JCPenney, after hiring a senior Apple executive 17 months ago, with a ton of fanfare and a bunch of money, and deciding to eliminate sales at the company, that was his big vision, going on the roadshow, deciding to do that, undoing all the sales and couponing and discounting at JCPenney, just this week, fired from his job. Let go. He destroyed JCPenney, destroyed it, destroyed the company, shaved its stock price more than in half. The company is in ruins. They are trying to salvage the business through the simple act of ending discounting, by eliminating discounts. And I thought the discussion was very telling in the New York Times. They went out and interviewed some JCPenney customers. And they heard, for example, from this very canonical customer who said, you know, I can't tell if the price is better when it's one price. I don't know which price is better if JCPenney just says it's a low price. I don't know. But it doesn't matter. Because you know what? Getting that coupon, finding that deal, walking up to the counter and handing that coupon over to the cashier, man, that's a rush. The quote from one of their customers, like a mid-40s female. And what is she saying? What is she saying? Any of you watched Extreme Couponing? You've seen the crazy version of this shit, right? It's fun. Deals are fun. Discounts can be fun. If you can play them. If you can play them, they're fun. It's not that people don't care about getting the best price. Walmart is a price leader, and they're very successful. But discounting can be fun. And it can also be deadly. It can also be an addiction. It can also be an endless cycle of constant discounting. I talk about Bed Bath & Beyond all the time. This 20% off coupon, totally ubiquitous. Would you ever go into a Bed Bath & Beyond without one of these? I mean, who does that sort of thing? That shit is ridiculous. Nobody would. And even in JCPenney, they even very transparently said they raised their prices to have the discounting. Everybody knows the game is being played. But the fact that the game is understood, the fact that the game is afoot, the fact that the game is known, doesn't diminish the fact that it's fun. That has no effect on whether it's fun or not. It's that loop that makes it fun. And it's not a question of pricing. It's a question of emotional engagement with users. And this is a very, very important point, my friends. Let's be clear. Revenue does not tell you anything about the engagement level of your users. You can be the most valuable company in the world or the least valuable company in the world. That doesn't tell you anything about how engaged your users are. Consider your cable bill. Are you super engaged with it as you pay for it? Does that act of paying your bill tell you whether the user is engaged or not? Does pulling out the wallet signal engagement? It does not. Revenue is the product of engagement. It's not engagement in itself. It results from a good system that drives engagement over the long term. And similarly, an important lesson, just because you walk through the doors of your office into your amazing, amazing job on the 47th floor of the Chrysler Building does not mean you stop being the same distracted, cell phone-addled human that you were the second before you walked through those doors. But in corporate America and in companies around the world, we're all part of a shared delusion that distraction, that engagement problem that our customers have, that our customers have, does not also extend to our employees. They're somehow not normal people once they walk through the door and do their jobs, because that's what everybody does. You know? People work when they're at work, and they take it seriously. There's not an engagement problem there, but you know this isn't true, friends. You know this isn't true. And so, one of my favorite examples of seeing the synthesis of these things, the notion that these things are the same, that the engagement problems of the consumer and the engagement problems of employees are the same, comes to us in the form of Domino's Pizza Hero, which some of you might be familiar with. So the basic premise of Pizza Hero is this. It's an iOS game. You can download it, play it on your iPhone or iPad. And in the game, you play a pizzaiolo or a pizzaiola. That's somebody who makes pizzas for a living. And you can grab any of the toppings from Domino's that you want. You learn to make the dough, knead it out, spin it, put the toppings on it, and so on. And when you have a pizza pie that you like, and you've earned the points, and you've leveled up, and you've achieved the ability to make a pizza, you can click a button and have it ordered at your local Domino's, and it will be delivered to you right from the game. Right? The synthesis of fun and commerce. But that's not all. If you're real good at Domino's Pizza Hero, like really good at it, Domino's will invite you to apply for a job. Would I lie? This is a real business problem for a company with humongous turnover, large numbers of employees switching every year, right? It's an ingenious solution. The first few weeks of operation, millions and millions of players on Domino's Pizza Hero, because people like to make pizzas. And so the gamification revolution, the reason why I wrote this book, the reason why we do this and why we come together, why our sessions here at GSummit are a mixture of enterprise and consumer, why all of these things are together, because you know, singularly, you understand how significant this change is. How much this next generation of consumer isn't like our grandfather's generation. How little they will tolerate the gray, boring, dull world of most marketing and most enterprise engagement. You understand that there are 3 legs to every company's engagement strategy and being successful at it. That it must be gamification engagement, must be strategic, it must focus on the employees, and it must focus on the consumers. And that in order to do that in this leading edge environment, you have to understand the best practices, the case studies. And yet, that you all are writing the story of this gamification revolution right now. If you were, as some of you are, alumni from the first year of GSummit, you will see the incredible increase in the number of case studies that we have. The first time around, I was telling this earlier today, we had 12 sessions, and I was begging people to come. Half of those sessions were panels, right? So we could get people together, and they could have a discussion that wasn't about case studies. And this time, we had 70 people and hundreds of people I had to turn down to come speak at the conference who had case studies to share with us about what they've done. And each one of you, too, will now hopefully go forth and become part of this community out in the world doing stuff, fixing this engagement problem, being at the forefront of this revolution, changing the way that your companies, organizations, governments operate, bringing that engagement understanding, the melding of psychology and game design, loyalty program design, behavioral economics, bringing those things together, fixing this problem. And you know, in fixing this problem, you'll be doing an incredibly important service. Because I'll tell you, when this next generation comes fully online, and you've seen all the stats, you know that this millennial generation and that next evolution of humanity, they're coming online fast. But when they come online as important consumers and meaningful members of the employment base, they are going to fuck some stuff up. And I don't use that word lightly. You'd be surprised. I've used it 3 times, but I mean it when I say it. This is going to make the arrival of the internet look like a joke, because they simply will not engage. And some of you already know this to be true, and that's why you're here. Some of you have already managed these people. Some of you already see these consumers in your midst. Many of you already know how advertising fails to connect today, and you understand how deep and profound this engagement crisis is. But I want to leave you with this thought, and I think this is important for all of us to understand, which is that it's not this next generation human with all of their new capabilities and new issues that we actually need to be worried about, because they're going to do just fine. It's us that needs the help. It's everybody else who needs to learn from them how to be more engaged. Learn from them what a system should be like, how much fun, how much playfulness, how many friends, how much feedback should be in a system. They may be leading the charge, but they're not actually the ones that we're doing it for. It's for everybody else to level this playing field, to connect with this future generation. And so, I'm incredibly, incredibly honored that all of you are part of this amazing gamification revolution, that you're leading that charge, that you're out there doing these amazing things, that you've spent your 2 or 3 days with us this week learning from these experts. So please, 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 do not let this be the last moment that you connect with these techniques, with these ideas. Everyone in this room is part of your community. Connect with each other. Connect with the speakers. Connect with me. Get on gamification.co. Join us in this ongoing conversation. Lean on each other and learn from these design patterns. We're way ahead of the industries that spawned us. Both games, loyalty, behavioral economics. We're out there building shit that they still don't understand. That's why they're constantly up in arms about should it be gamification or chalkification. I don't know, they both sound good to me. That's why, because they don't understand what we're doing. This is design pattern. This is driven by you. You are the vanguards of this movement. And so, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so very much for being part of it. I look forward to all the incredibly cool shit that you're going to build. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, you guys. Thank you. It's been really amazing. 2 parting comments for you. The first one is top users of MemeCube. It's been an oft-requested item. If you're in the top MemeCube user group, thank you for being such a great supporter of that platform this year. You also, if you're in that top group, can pick up a special GSummit staff shirt at the front desk as your little parting gift for being here. Yes, clap, clap. If you'd like to join us now that the conference is over, and we'll be closing up the venue shortly, if you'd like to continue the discussion with me and the rest of the folks, we're heading over to Mars Bar, which is right over here on this corner, to get really plastered. Thank you. See you all. Thank you.